Okay, it is just about time. I'm settled down. So, welcome back, everyone. This is our second day of reading from Archblade, Legend of the Defiler. Last time we got through the first 6 chapters, wherein we met, presumably, the lion's share of the cast. The crew of the Forerunner, Angel, the adorable little wallflower, Lark, the titular Defiler, who seems to be a bit of a knight in shining armor, it seems, showing up and just when they need it most, and a bit of a history, but I'm sure we'll find out more of that as we go on. We've been immersing ourselves in the world building that's been going on, both on the planet, around the planet, and out in the stars. So we're starting to see sort of the development of both the fantasy and the sci-fi elements of the story come together, and how they intertwine and develop into the book and the overarching story and how everything interacts together. So, I believe the author is in here again tonight, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to chime in, or comments, or just general support. We, as I've mentioned, we always love to support independent authors and people that are just trying to get their work out there. The creatives have got to stick together, right? So feel free to give your support, send your love. Check out their link tree. It's in the description of this stream. It's where you can find their socials as well as links to their storefronts where you can buy a copy of the book for yourself. And that's enough shilling for me tonight, for now at least. So let's just go ahead and jump right back into the book. I'm kind of champing at the bit to see how things develop from here on out. So we now return with Chapter 7 of Archblade, Legend of the Defiler. Sosaria, the gleaming jewel of civilization, peace, harmony, and hypocrisy. The following morning, Lark stood on the bridge beside Ockran as Sosaria came into view. Lauren sat eagerly in the pilot's chair and gaped with wonder at the coastal city. Angel stood at communications and sensors, her eyes also fixed on the view screen. A giant gray castle loomed to the north, with 5 spires stretching to the cloudless sky. The weathered stone was centuries old, with massive green banners fluttering above the entrance. Hundreds of buildings sprung up around its base and unfurled across the land until they reached an enormous wall that outlined the entire city. At twice the height of the wall, watchtowers were spaced evenly around the perimeter. On the eastern side, a large port sat where boats with white sails were put out to sea. Tucked against the outer wall were numerous farms with fields that stretched for kilometers. The ship crept over the southern gate. Soldiers on the flanking watchtowers held their weapons tight and watched the Forerunner intently. "You're sure you've sent word of our arrival?" Ockran asked with the slightest hint of apprehension in his voice. "It would be a shame if they shot us down after all this." Lark shook his head and gave him a small pat on the shoulder, mirroring Ockran's earlier gesture. "I did. They confirmed our approach and said to land in the lot beside the castle, where we store our striders. I promise, no matter what happens, no one will shoot or threaten you." He didn't make eye contact, but something about his words made the captain worry. Ockran turned to Lauren and signaled her to proceed with Lark's instructions. As they drew closer to the castle, the buildings abruptly dropped off to reveal an expanse of flagstones, where dozens of strider vehicles were parked, including one similar to Lark's. A large area was cleared, and a trio of figures stood on standby as the Forerunner carefully touched down. Ockran smoothed the front of his uniform with his palms, and adjusted his cuffs to be perfectly straight. His fingers absently touched the metal insignia over his left shoulder that signified his rank as ship captain. "Lauren, Angel, I want you with me when we greet our potential new allies," he ordered as he walked to the door, Lark in tow. Lauren quickly followed, but Angel looked down for a second before responding softly, "Sir, I don't think I should—" "That's an order, crewwoman," he interrupted, and turned to face her directly. "I know you don't enjoy situations like this, but I need you there for your keen observational skills." Without waiting for a response, Ockran turned on his heel and exited the bridge. Angel suppressed a groan, but followed as ordered, trying to keep as much distance between Lark and herself as possible. As they waited for the hatch to open, she briefly glanced at him and noted that he appeared to be fidgeting. Akron was oblivious, and the changes were almost imperceptible, but Lark kept flexing his fingers and shifting his weight between his legs. Further speculation was thwarted by the hatch whirring open and extending the ramp to ground level. Lark took the lead and moved forward. At the bottom of the ramp was a wire-thin older gentleman, wearing an ostentatious green robe and a matching hat. He examined the crew curiously through a fine pair of gold spectacles on the end of a wrinkled nose. A gray mustache raised along his lips as he pulled them back into an almost wolfish smile. He appeared quite harmless, but there was an unmistakable tension with the prominent armored men who stood at his sides. They held poleaxes that stood over 2 meters high, with sharp tips that glinted in the sun. "Archblade Lark!" he greeted with an officious tone. "I see you have at last lived up to your responsibility. The technology you brought us will most assuredly help us to defeat our enemies." He held his hands open in a greeting as he approached the group. "I am Advisor Vamed Ralonides, and I will be in charge of commandeering your vessel." Akron's hand immediately went to his hip, and he cursed himself for leaving his weapon behind. The guards tightened the grip on their poleaxes, and the Forerunner crew took a calculated step back. As Akron opened his mouth to speak, Lark interrupted him with a deadly calm voice. "You will not do anything with these people or their ship without their permission." Vamet froze and nearly tripped over the hem of his robe in indignation. After regaining his composure, he adjusted his hat and drew up to his full height as he glared at the young warrior. "You don't have the authority to say that, boy. You know our law. Any alien vessel or technology must be claimed for Sosaria. It is in all of our best interests." "You want to steal my ship and force us to fight in your war?" Akron demanded incredulously, as rage rose inside of his chest. "We wouldn't force you to fight, of course. However, the barrier is forcing you to stay on Durance. So if you choose to stay out of the conflict, we will keep you safe within our walls. In the meantime, we will use your ship and technology to destroy the Conclave. When that's all done, you may have whatever remains and be free to leave at your leisure." Vamet's voice was thick with condescension, as though he were explaining things to a dim-witted child. "I said no!" Lark snarled. "I know the law. I know how you and the rest of the council forced it on us despite the king and most of our people protesting it." Vamet folded his arms and raised his chin haughtily. "However, as you well know, older laws always take precedence, and these people were being attacked by Adura when I found them." "So, what does that have to do with anything?" Vamet asked in an exasperated voice, his narrowed eyes fixed on Lark. The younger man continued his icy glare. "Anyone being attacked by the Conclave must be given assistance and safe haven by Sosaria and the Archblades," Lark recited clearly. "Safe haven means they can come here, trade for what they need, and have the freedom to leave when they want. That was one of our first laws put into effect when the Archblades were created." Lark looked pointedly at the guards flanking Vamet and nodded. "That means you don't touch them." His tone was threatening, as though he was prepared to draw a weapon to prove his point. Akron suppressed an amused snort. He wanted to give the old man some choice words of his own, but he let Lark do the talking, while he maintained the composed facade of a captain. He slowly relaxed his shoulders, which had been creeping up from tension. Subtly, he glanced at Lauren and Angel and saw their bodies visibly ease with relief. Vamet's nostrils flared as he tried to contain his anger. "We'll be checking the records on your Strider and armlet to verify your claims." Lark shrugged and removed his communication armlet, tossing it to one of the guards. "Go right ahead. You will find that they clearly show that the Forerunner did not show up on my sensors until they were being attacked." With a glare and a curt gesture, Vamet motioned for the 2 guards to follow him as he started towards the hatch. As he passed by, his shoulder collided with Lark, subtly shuffling the young Archblade aside. "Excuse me," Lark snapped, and shot his arm out to block their way. "What is it now?" Vamet practically screeched as his patience was worn thin. "You should ask permission before boarding someone else's ship," Lark declared with a smirk, and turned to Akron. "What do you say, Captain? Can they come aboard and inspect my vessel?" Akron had to use every shred of his training to maintain professional decorum. He wanted nothing more than to rub the man's face in his failure. Instead, he made a point to appear as though he had to take time to weigh the decision as the advisor huffed like he was about to have a heart attack. "I suppose someone can show you the way. But be careful you don't get the carpet dirty," Akron said, with an officious tone that mimicked the old man as he sent a message to Reynard to meet the advisor at the hatch. Vamet's eyes locked onto Lark with a murderous gleam. He forced a smile that looked more threatening than friendly, and swiftly entered the ship with the 2 guards in tow. Once they were out of earshot, Lauren doubled over in laughter, and Ockran gave a friendly punch to Lark's arm. You could have warned us about that, you know, he scolded. Honestly, I didn't think they would go through with it. The ink is barely dry on that law, and I never expected him to have the gall to try to enforce it so soon. That old bastard's become bolder since I was here last. Lark sighed and glanced uneasily back to the ship. What would you have done if they refused? Angel asked quietly. Lark studied her, surprised she was speaking to him, then replied plainly. I would have helped you fight your way out, obviously. Angel's eyes widened as she clutched her datapad closer to her chest. She was floored that he would have fought his own people over their sovereignty. However, a delighted shout pierced their ears before she could comment further. Lark! In a blur of green velvet and brown leather, Lark was accosted by an exuberant woman who lifted him into the air with a great bear hug. Glad to see you too, Tess. He choked from the force of her grip. The woman laughed loudly as she sat him down on the ground and clapped him on the back. She stood nearly a head taller than him, with dark brown hair plaited down her back, wide emerald green eyes, and pink lips that were triumphantly smiling at her friend. She still had an arm around her shoulders as she surveyed the crew of the Forerunner. It's good to have you home, she stated cheerfully, and with guests, I see. Yes, allow me to introduce Captain Ockran, Lauren, and Angel of the Forerunner. Vammon is going through my sensors in a hissy fit because I invoked our guardian law to stop him from stealing their ship. Lark reported proudly. Ockran, this is Princess Tessindra Falderon of Sosaria. Falderon? Falderon? Not sure which one I like. The woman laughed again. The sound was high and soft. She moved to Ockran and offered a hand, which was eagerly taken. Call me Taz, and please, allow me to apologize for your impolite welcome on our kingdom's behalf. We're in the process of overhauling our leadership, and things have been difficult, to say the least. No harm done. Our own history is full of similar issues with governing and deciding who is in charge, Ockran responded warmly. At least allow me to make it up to you by inviting your entire crew to the palace for dinner. My father will be delighted to meet you, and we haven't had a proper party in ages. Afterward, we can talk about what our people might offer each other. Tessindra turned to Lark, with a sudden somber face. And Lark, be careful with Vammon. He is head of the council now, and he has the power to make your life difficult if he wants to. She bid them farewell, and climbed into one of the striders. It was wider than Lark's, lower to the ground, and the hull was painted forest green with gold stenciling. When it powered on, it was practically silent. Tessindra rapidly turned the vehicle and sped towards the castle's entrance. Lark sneered at the princess's parting words. I'd love to see him try, Lark muttered to himself, listening a snicker from Lauren and Ockran. Meanwhile, Angel stood by quietly, having found herself studying Lark's interactions with the lively princess. Will you be joining us tonight? Ockran asked as he examined the new surroundings, finally able to appreciate them now that his ship was no longer under threat of impoundment. Of course. I have to check in with my commander, so unless the Conclave decides to attack us in the next few hours, I'll definitely be there, Lark promised with a wave before heading to the castle. I still can't believe he would have fought for us to escape, Angel murmured. We're lucky he's on our side, Ockran proclaimed with relief. I want a shift rotation drawn up for the crew while we are visiting. At least 2 people need to be with the ship at all times, just in case anyone changes their mind about taking it. Everyone else has shore leave, with standing orders to learn as much about these people, this world, and the Conclave as they can while we are here. Angel and Lauren nodded and returned to the ship, but Ockran lingered a few moments more as he took in the sight of the massive castle, a sense of awe overtaking him. Angel stood in an impossibly lavish room. It was several times larger than any gathering hall he had seen back home, and so many exotic decorations. Paintings, exemplary tapestries, and displays showing impressive suits of armor and marvelous weapons were hung on every wall and tucked in every corner. The floor was covered in a thick green carpet with intricate designs woven in gold thread. She looked down at her dress uniform, which was identical to her standard attire except black with a higher collar, and felt out of place among such opulence. The food laid out across the long table was captivating. There were many things similar to what they had on their home planet, but some of it was so foreign that it reminded her she was on an alien world. She glanced over at Tarn, who sampled the extensive offering of plates and was vigorously taking notes for supplies to obtain. She smiled at the delightful thought that meals were going to drastically improve in the days to come. What was more fascinating was the addition of magic into all parts of Sosarian life. Lamps and light sources were ignited by a single glowing touch. The food was prepared with intense fire magic used by the cooks. Even the servants used water magic to wash surfaces and clean the floors. What was fantastical to her and her crew was considered ordinary to everyone in Sosaria. "So, Captain, when can we start upgrading your ship so you can stave off attacks from the Conclave?" the king questioned jovially, as he ate what appeared to be a sizable meat-filled bun. He had been introduced as Varius Falderon. He was an older man, somewhere between Ockran and Dravik in age, but he had a youthful charm that was only betrayed by wrinkles around his eyes and his brilliant white hair. "I thought we would talk more about what we could offer first. I'm sure upgrades like that would be extensive," Ockran speculated as he bit into a shellfish dish in butter sauce. "Nonsense. As Lark said, we help anyone attacked by the Conclave. If you want to explore Durance, then you'll need to be able to defend yourselves properly. It also means that you can have supplies and food for whenever you decide to leave." His voice was firm and commanding, and it was clear he would not take no for an answer. Ockran smirked and held his hands palms up in mock surrender. "Who am I to argue with the king?" Both men laughed, and Ockran raised his wineglass before adding, "And in the meantime, I am certain there is much we can learn from each other." Angel released a small breath of relief as she watched the two men get along like old friends. It helped put the issue to rest on how they would proceed. She looked through the room, noting her fellow crew members. Lily had told everyone she was interested in learning about the dense sea vegetation the Sosarians grew as a potential energy source. Evidently, entire forests of kelp grew close to the shoreline, and they were some kind of miracle food, providing extreme amounts of nutrients in small quantities. She was expected to be gone for the evening and report back the following day. Lauren was talking to the princess, sharing a bottle of what appeared to be whiskey. They had learned that Tisindra, despite being royalty, was in charge of military forces and would even go onto the field of battle with the other soldiers. Lauren was especially impressed that someone so important fought side by side with infantry and had dozens of questions for the junior monarch. Maya sat beside her husband, reading one of many books she had borrowed from the Royal Library about Sosarian medical sciences. At first, the text was illegible, but their datapads translated the written language easily, and to no one's surprise, it was very similar to their own. She fixated on learning every detail on record about the kind of biological attacks the Conclave used. Although she contributed little to the conversation, Ockran periodically nudged her, asking her about what she was reading, or offered her food from his plate. Bastian had already made a second home in the library, where he buried himself in the records about Sosarian history. Ockran had commented that Bastian could be lost there for weeks unless they sent in a rescue party. Angel admired the man's fervent passion, even though it could be overwhelming at times. Dravik and Reynard were left on the ship, and volunteered to be left behind for the evening. Dravik stated that he wasn't much for parties, and after the incident with Vavid, Reynard felt especially protective of the Forerunner. Angel sighed as her eyes perused the crowd. The familiar flash of a blue tunic caught her attention, and she observed that Lark sat at the farthest end of the table and ate by himself. The chair closest to him was vacant, so he looked like a man forgotten, even by the many servants who flitted around the room refilling drinks. He appeared to be reading reports, and didn't seem to pay attention to the crowds of people nearby. Only Varius, Tisindra, and the Forerunner crew paid any attention to him. Angel was tempted for a moment to join him. She remembered what it was like to be the kid eating alone, but then she recalled their argument and felt a fresh wave of frustration all over again. She set her plate down, having barely touched the food, and walked over to Maya. "Could you tell the captain I'm going out for a walk before returning to the ship? I want to see more of the city," she whispered. Despite her desire to be unnoticed, Tisindra turned to her and flourished, as though to indicate the entire room. "Would you like me to arrange an escort or guide? Sosari is a big place, and it's easy to get lost." She must have said it rather loudly, because a dozen eyes swiveled and stared at Angel curiously. Lark glanced up from his papers, but once he saw she was the object of attention, he returned to his reading. Angel held up her hands in a polite refusal. "No, ma'am, that's all right. I think I can find my way around." She turned on her heel and hurried towards the hall. When she was out of sight and earshot of the party, she leaned against the wall to catch her breath. Her emotions surged, and a hot blush crept up her cheeks. She clasped her trembling hands together and regained some composure within minutes, as she used the breathing techniques that Maya taught her. Once she was able, she stood up, readjusted her uniform, and headed for the exit. As she approached the wooden doors, she saw a large man in full armor, wielding an equally impressive sword on his back. At first, she wondered she might have gone the wrong way, but he turned to her and bowed deeply. "Commander Saren Willis, at your service, ma'am." "I'm keeping an eye on the front entrance while your party is going on," he announced. Angel sighed in relief, happy that she wasn't in trouble somehow. She studied his weapon and thought to herself it looked very similar to Lark's. "You're the leader of the Archblades?" she asked tentatively. Yeah, I see that. It's an authentic depiction of a minor anxiety attack. So the parts where the social battery overcharges and overloads is definitely understandable and believable. "Yes, ma'am. As our honored guests, you get the best of what we have to offer tonight." He smiled broadly, showing unspoken pride in his position. "Thank you. We appreciate it," she said graciously. She stepped forward, almost leaving them then and there, but suddenly stopped and turned to him once more. This man was Lark's superior officer, and could be a font of information. "Could you answer some questions about Lark?" "The Defiler? What do you want to know?" he asked with a sudden gruffness, his smile immediately disappearing. "I noticed the servants don't appear to care for him, and with the confrontation with the advisor, I wondered if he had any other problems here." She knew it was nosy, but she couldn't contain her curiosity. Saren snorted with derision and shook his head. "He is a bit of a troublemaker, ma'am. He is a damn skilled fighter, and I'll never hear anyone say differently. But he doesn't know how to keep his head down and follow orders." "You mean with Vaman," she stated with an expectant gaze at Saren. "That's one way, yes. His mind is still stuck back to when his father was alive, and while I have the utmost respect for Darien and his memory, things are different now, and we must live with that," he replied. "Are you sure there's nothing else?" she pressed, as her interest pushed past her usual wariness. The man coughed politely, and schooled his face into a guarded mask. "He's a soldier. He does his job well, and sometimes his mouth gets him in trouble. That's all I will say." Once she realized that was the best information she would get, Angel gave a courteous goodbye and walked out into the open air. The sun had only begun to set, and the sky was a faded blue with pink clouds overhead. After clearing the main gates, Angel found herself in an open plaza with large buildings on either side. The road through fractured into various streets and alleys as far as the eye could see. She noted the wealthier merchants were closest to the castle, and she could see many businesses associated with weapons, armor, and other necessities for war. A sudden breeze raced across her back, and she shivered as she folded her arms, wishing her dress uniform was designed for cooler environments. She briefly wondered if she could find a jacket as she pulled out her pad. Part of her job with sensors was to scan the city as they flew over it, so now they each had a detailed grid map of all Sosaria at their fingertips. She plugged in a route that took her through the main market square and set on her way. Saren's answers had been insightful, but ultimately left her with more questions than before. Still, knowing that Lark ran his mouth enough to get him in trouble with many people, in a way, made her own argument with him feel less like a personal affront and more like a personality flaw. It helped to know that her assessment wasn't inaccurate. Singing a soft tune to herself, she admired the alien buildings of Sosaria. They were made of fine white stone and wood, painted bright colors, and were built so close to each other that the roofs overlapped in one continual covering. One particular building had a long wooden panel, painted in bright yellow with intricate animal designs stenciled throughout. The toe of her boot caught hold of something, and she suddenly pitched forward. Instinctively, her hands shot out to break her fall, but when she glanced down, she saw the top of a young child's head. At the last second, Angel managed to twist her body, and she crashed against the beautiful wall. "Ow," she moaned, and assessed the damage. Her toes were throbbing, and her shoulder that hit the wall protested its cruel treatment, but otherwise she was fine. Angel pushed herself to her feet and regarded the child before her. The girl was quietly stacking stones on top of each other to create a tower, one of which must have been the object she had tripped on. The girl's long brown hair hung down to her waist, and wore a plain orange dress. The material was simple and loose-fitted, so she looked out of place for being so close to the castle. "I'm sorry," Angel offered as she knelt by the girl. "I didn't see you there." You're one of the new people, the girl muttered in a hollow voice. Yes, my name is Angel. What's yours? Angel asked. She tilted her head to try and peek at the girl's face, but dark tresses were in the way. Grace, the girl acknowledged after a couple of seconds. Her hands withdrew into her lap, and she sat still. That's a pretty name, Angel complimented, with a friendly lilt to her voice. Where are your parents, Grace? She craned her neck, but the street was deserted. They're dead, Grace replied in a grave monotone. They died when the monsters attacked our village. Angel's heart sank. Grace was no more than 10, but the words and tone of her voice seemed to add entire years to her life. Where are you supposed to be? It's getting dark, and you shouldn't be on the street, she asked gently. I live at the orphanage, with the other kids, but I wanted to go out to play. I don't know how to get back, though, Grace admitted, barely above a whisper. Without warning, Grace's hand shot out, and she struck her tower. The rocks flew in all directions and clattered across the ground. A small stone struck Angel's shin, but she didn't flinch. Grace turned her head and stared up at her. Angel was unable to stifle her gasp. Grace's face and throat were covered in scars. She was missing part of her left ear. Her left eye was covered in a milky haze, and it peered listlessly ahead. Her right eye was a deep blue, but appeared unfocused and exhausted. Angel mentally shook herself back to her senses and offered Grace her hand. I bet I could help you find your way back if you let me. Grace stood with a slight noise of agreement before slowly grasping her hand, to which Angel gave a reassuring squeeze. Where to? Grace pointed towards the ocean and replied, It's somewhere by the docks. Angel held Grace's hand tightly and began a brisk pace. As they walked, she suddenly glanced down at the girl's face again and wished they had the means to help her, but with the injuries being so old, there was no way to repair the damage with the equipment they had. On Soledad, it would have been a simple procedure, and she'd be fixed within minutes. My brother did this to me, Grace stated absently, as though she were observing the weather. She turned her head from side to side as she tried to locate familiar buildings. Angel felt her entire body freeze over and had to will herself not to accidentally crush Grace's fingers from shock. When the bad men attacked our village, Mom and Dad tried to hide us away, Grace continued. They still broke into our house, and my dad was killed. Mom grabbed Alec and tried to run. She screamed for me to follow, but a monster got her. What happened next? Angel asked, forcing herself to continue, despite the icy grip the girl's words had held on her heart. I pulled Alec away from the monster, and we ran to the keeper's old shed. I knew no one would go there. It has lots of spiders, Grace said. Angel felt tears welling up, and she took a shaky breath. You're a courageous little girl, Grace. I don't know how long we were there, but Alec started getting sick. He started crying and saying that his stomach hurt. I tried to get him to stop. I promised him all my desserts for a year if he would go quiet. I didn't want the bad people with their monsters to hear us. After a long time, Alec fell asleep. I thought he would be fine, Grace murmured. A few minutes of silence passed between the two, and Angel felt that she might explode if she didn't ask the question. Then what? Grace turned her face to Angel, and her lips drew into a tight line. Alec woke up. He was different, though. A big man in armor saved me. Alec... They came to a halt, and Angel saw a flicker of something in her blue eye. She dropped to one knee and pulled the thin frame of the young girl into a tight hug, and she grit her teeth. She took several large breaths to try and get her heart to slow back down. This time it was not anxiety that fueled her tremors. It was fury and anguish. Finally, she pulled back and tried to give Grace her best smile. At least you're safe now. There's a whole army and big walls to protect you. It doesn't matter, Grace said placidly. The big bad men will still come, and nothing can stop them. All of us are going to die. Angel fell silent. She had nothing to say that could help. Nothing could be done to bring the girl's family back, and nothing could give Grace a normal childhood again. Her entire life had been taken away by the Conclave. I think it's this way, Grace mumbled, and broke away from Angel to walk down a street that ran parallel to the ocean. Angel followed closely behind, and soon they came to a stop in front of a bright orange building with a large fence around it. A loud shriek, followed by a chorus of giggles, carried from an open window into the street. Thank you for walking with me, Grace murmured, with a polite bow of her head. You're welcome, Angel responded quietly. And Grace walked to the door. Angel wanted to say or do more. She wanted to find a way to take care of this poor child, or prove to her that everything was going to be okay. But she just stood in silence as she watched Grace go into the orphanage. She practically ran as a fresh wave of tears began to fall. From Lark's stories, she knew the Conclave was horrible and evil, but getting a first-hand account from a child made it all the more real. It wasn't just some random maniac in the wilderness, or even a horde of walking corpses. Those monsters had been people, and those people had families. How many Graces had been orphaned or outright killed by them? She slowed down as she reached a street with many lights and the sounds of people milling around. Wiping her face with her sleeve, she brushed the dust from her uniform and tried to pull herself together. She stepped into the brightly lit square. A night market was in full swing, and she wanted to distract herself from her thoughts before they became so huge they crushed her into nothingness. She stopped several blocks down and wistfully examined a display of gorgeous gowns when she heard a voice call out to her. She looked around in confusion until she caught a glimpse of Lily running towards her. The sight was a surprise, as she had rarely seen the botanist exert herself physically. Lily grinned from ear to ear while holding a large, heavy bag. "Angel, it's extraordinary!" she panted as she stopped to set the bag down to open. Angel's nose wrinkled at the musty scent of fish and ocean foam. "Everything they said about the kelp is true. I scanned it carefully, and it's over 20 times as efficient for nutrients and energy than anything we have back home." Lily's voice was breathless from excitement. Angel started to give her a skeptical look, but reminded herself that Lily dedicated her life to botany and the practical application of plants. The woman obviously knew what she was talking about. "I need to get this back to the ship and run more tests. If we can utilize it, and possibly grow our own, we won't need to worry about energy our whole trip back. It could even completely revolutionize energy uses for our entire world." She picked the heavy bag up, slinging it over her shoulder. "That sounds unbelievable," Angel remarked, the significance of the information sinking in. "It must be difficult to harvest, or expensive somehow. Can we get enough?" Lily laughed with giddy excitement and shook her head. Her hair stuck to her cheeks from the seawater she had been splashing in. "That's the most amazing thing. It's all over the coast here. They use it for field rations and feeding livestock, but there are gigantic fields of this stuff growing in the ocean. Far more than they could ever use, so they're letting us have as much as we want." Lily looked as though she might dance from joy at her discovery. Angel felt her own excitement rising, and found it hard not to share in Lily's enthusiasm. "Would you like some help? I was thinking about heading back to the ship myself," she offered. Lily put a hand on her shoulder, having to stop from hugging her. "Would you? I could use all the help I can get." Angel nodded, and the two hurried back to the ship. And that brings us to the end of Chapter 7. So it seems that it's not all sunshine in Sosaria. There may be some shadows underneath. As always, everywhere, doesn't matter what world you're in, politics will darken any doorstep. But as we expected, it seems Lark has a little bit of trouble at home, whether it just be his own overeagerness or tendency to get into trouble with those above board that may be just a little too much of a cowboy, perhaps. Or there could be more going on. It's still too early to see, but he seems almost ostracized, and it takes a little bit more than being cocksure to get that sort of treatment. So we'll probably find out more as we go on, I'm sure. So let's carry on with Chapter 8 here. The people of Durance are incredibly diverse. Almost impossible to think they came from the same race. The next day, Maya had picked a quaint but comfortable bistro for lunch with Akron. They hadn't been on an actual date since before they left home, and she wanted to seize an opportunity while visiting the foreign city. She glanced over at her husband as he pored over an impressively extensive menu of various entrees. "Did you see those large-scaled creatures that we passed on the way here?" she asked as she put her menu down, having already decided what she wanted. "Ravagers," Akron informed. "Varius told me they were part of some grand experiment of the Conclave hundreds of years ago, and they managed to rebel and escape." He set his menu down on top of hers and took her small hand into his. Apparently, they live in huge subterranean tunnels with their own society and even visit and trade with other races. "Amazing," Maya commented as she studied around the establishment and settled on a pear tucked into a corner booth, and wasn't immediately visible when Maya and Akron sat down. The pear was a ravager eating a large hunk of what appeared to be raw meat, carefully tearing small chunks of meat as they ate, listening intently to the much shorter companion. Their other half was a rail thin woman with dark skin and shoulder-length pewter gray hair. Even at a distance, Maya saw the modeling on her skin and how dry and lifeless her hair appeared. "You're staring, Maya," Akron gently chastised. She shot him an irritated look and picked up a menu once more in an attempt to hide her embarrassment. Unfortunately, it was upside down, and she stubbornly glared at the fine calligraphy. After a moment to collect herself, she whispered, "The treekin all have similar symptoms. I hear that they have a genetic illness that is slowly killing off their entire race, and no one can find a cure." Her voice was barely loud enough for Akron to hear, but her sadness was all too clear. He nodded to a waiter who brought them tall glasses of water and took their order. "Do you think we can do anything to help them?" Akron inquired, when the waiter was gone and Maya's wall had been taken away. "I hope so," she replied, and twisted a cloth napkin in her hands. "I already took some blood samples from a few of them, so I'll start conducting tests on the ship today." Akron coughed and choked on his drink, drawing attention from the other patrons and an amused grin from his wife. After regaining his breath, he looked at her through impressed and teary eyes. "How did you manage to do that already? We haven't even been here a full day." Maya shrugged modestly. Lark knew a large family living out on one of the farms. They were extremely polite and eager to help with any research to benefit their people. "It's amazing that what you all get done under my nose." Akron stared incredulously at his wife. "Maybe I'm starting to lose touch as a captain in my old age." With a soft laugh, Maya leaned over, carefully stroked his hand and squeezed it. "You're a fine captain, Akron. You know when to hold the reins and when to let go. And as much as the crew might get away with things now and again, they still have the utmost respect for you and will follow you anywhere." Akron smiled at the reassurance and laced his fingers with hers, grateful again for the kind woman he married. When the librarian summoned Saren, he was intrigued. They were exhausted due to a member of the Forerunner spending all night asking questions about everything in existence. However, it was not someone Saren had seen at the banquet, and according to them, the man was shockingly tall. Today, another crew member had questions of their own, and the librarians practically begged for assistance so that they might be able to sleep. When he reached the library, he sighed to himself and adjusted his cloak. He expected to find the same red-headed woman who'd discussed military tactics and bonded so well with the princess the night before. However, it was a man who turned and smiled warmly at him instead. "My name is Reynard. I'm the Forerunner strategist," he offered with an outstretched hand. Saren grasped it firmly and felt a small wave of relief, thinking to himself it was going to be much less uphill than he thought. Reynard had spent the first hour carefully examining a detailed map of the continent. On closer inspection, it had minute details, such as individual streams and a patchwork grid next to Sosaria, indicating various farms. He had taken considerable time to study Lifesever, the Conclave's base of operations, and the surrounding wasteland. Unsurprisingly, there were almost no details to be found in the enemy territory. "What do you want to know?" Saren asked, as he picked up a book that lay open on a small table. Seeing that it was on the aqueduct systems of the Stonekin, he scoffed and set it back down. "Scholars," he huffed in exasperation. "I was told there were 4 major territories along with the Conclave, so let's start there," Reynard asserted. Saren thought for a second before tapping on a section with jagged mountains that formed a lightning pattern at the center of the map and picked up a book with a red leather binding that lay on the table just off the map. He flipped it to a page on the Stonekin. They looked like Sosarians, but they were considerably taller, broad-shouldered, and the men had an impressive amount of facial hair. They were also portrayed as wearing predominantly hide and fur clothing. At first glance, they appeared almost wild, possibly even brutish. But as the pages turned, Reynard saw another story. They're a hardy people, somewhat slow on foot, but technologically advanced. They're master smiths that make metals out of a crystalline and steel alloy. This metal is used for their weapons, technology, and even Archblade swords. They have powerful armor that enhances their speed and strength, as well as large tanks charged by special gems that are much more powerful than our striders. Saren informed him as he turned the book to show Reynard a huge suit of armor with piston joints, and the operator was swinging an axe that looked heavy enough to break the spine of an average person. Reynard nodded thoughtfully as he absorbed everything he saw and heard. He had made it his mission to learn as much about the people of Durance as possible, Knowing their strengths and weaknesses could make it easier to interact with them, or, should the worst happen, defend against them. Satisfied with the explanation, Reynard pointed to a lush forest to the northwest with drawings of trees he had never seen on any planet they had visited. So, the tree can live here. What are they like? Saren skimmed his book until he found the correct chapter and showed him illustrations of the willowy people with darker skin tones and hair ranging from pure white to black and even blood red. They keep to themselves for the most part, although we occasionally have some that leave their home to make lives elsewhere. Reynard took the book in his hands and marveled as he saw drawings of the trees. They had trunks as black as night, yet their leaves appeared to have an eerie glow. He had a feeling the artist's rendition did not do them justice. He continued thumbing through the pages, which showed long weapons with winged blades and a large, strangely familiar beast. It looked similar to a rabbit from back home, but it featured short, slick hair and needle-sharp teeth, and they were massive, judging by the scale image. They call these creatures bonded, Saren pointed out. The tree can ride them into battle. They used to be a fast and deadly force with superior ranged capabilities and mounts. What do you mean by used to? Reynard inquired as he handed the book back. His eyes trained on Saren with intrigue. Between 30 and 40 years ago, they were affected by some kind of odd disease, Saren answered, his eyes growing stormy from the terrible memories dredged up. They call it the Blight. When it happened, I was just a young soldier then, not even a fully fledged Archblade. We were sent to help and provide relief and medical treatment, but we could do nothing. Eventually, every one of them, regardless of location, fell ill. The disease weakens their bodies, their immune systems, and they begin to waste away. And now, if reports are true, it might also affect their animals and the trees in the star canopies. And no one has been able to find a cure? Reynard asked quietly, disturbed by such a devastating illness. No, their healers were never able to treat it, and it's not magical, so our mages haven't been able to do anything either. The worst thing is that they have all given up and accepted their fate. They claim it is the will of nature or some nonsense, Saren grumbled bitterly. That's horrible, Reynard murmured, his voice trailing off. Silently, he thought back to Maya's early morning journey to visit a family on the outskirts of Sosaria. She had insisted on going alone, so he sat waiting on the bridge and spent hours anxiously waiting for the doctor's return. He hoped their efforts would not be in vain, and that Maya would be able to help these people. In an effort to change the topic and dissipate the cloud that now hung over them, he continued his questioning. What about the reptile people here? He pointed to the eastern portion of the map. I think Lark called them Ravagers? Yes, Saren confirmed. They were created a long time ago by the Conclave. They're a bit odd, but if you can get past that, you'll find they're good enough folk. They can change form to run on all forms as beasts, but the most significant thing about them is they are nearly immune to all magic. Reynard's eyes widened, and he exclaimed, That would make them a useful ally against the Conclave. Have you ever tried to form an alliance between your people? You all appear to have strengths that would complement each other. He turned to the map and began calculating the new information. You might have a chance to defeat the Conclave if everyone worked together. Saren folded his arms. Lark's father, Darien, dreamed of uniting every province against the Conclave and dedicated most of his life to doing it. Lark has even tried to carry on that dream, but with how things have been lately, it's impossible. Impossible how? Isn't the Conclave a threat to all of you? Reynard demanded, bewildered and appalled. The Treekin just want to die peacefully in their damn forest, and claim that war with the Conclave is fighting the natural order of things. They believe their sickness is practically divine providence for them to stand down, Saren spat. The Stonekin and the Ravagers have been too busy fighting each other for decades, and we're struggling to keep our own house in order. Why are they fighting? Reynard asked, his exasperation rising. The same reason many stupid conflicts start. One ancestor did something to piss off another, and no one can let it go. Then one thing leads to another, and revenge always takes priority. Saren seethed and clutched the book so hard his knuckles were white. Reynard pondered the new information. Your people have the most land and numbers. Why can't you take out the Conclave on your own? A full offensive is impossible due to how far away Lifesever is, and how slow our army moves on foot. It would be too easy for them to mobilize ahead of our arrival, so that we walk into a death trap. We may have the numbers, but can't send our full army without abandoning our citizens here. We don't have the military strength to fight a war on two fronts, so we can do nothing except skirmishes and damage control. It was getting late in the day, and Saren had to return to his duties. Reynard thanked him profusely for his help, and the Archblade commander gave him his leave with a formal bow. Once alone, Reynard gathered books and sat at a table nearest to the windows. The sunlight illuminated the pages and brought the images to life as he began to read about the military history and tactics of Caesarians. Before too long, he was opening a large volume on the Archblades, reading how their origins and the attributes that made them possibly the most formidable force on Durance. Tessindra sat in the mess hall of the Forerunner, a data pad in one hand, as she wrote notes on parchment with the other. She had spent hours analyzing the cultural database that Akron provided and was making notes on things she thought would be of particular use or interest to the people of Sosaria. Your Highness, ma'am? She glanced up to see Dravik with his arms folded behind his back and standing at attention. He watched her intently and waited for her to acknowledge him. Just Taz is fine, Dravik. I don't stand on formality unless I'm at the castle or doing something official. What do you need? Dravik looked relieved and became at ease. I was chatting with your shipwrights while they were working on our hull. They are great people, by the way. I love watching them work. But I got to talking to them about our engine technology and how it works on specially crafted prisms. They said we might be able to find more somewhere on the continent. The princess sat forward with her chin on her interlocked hands as she mulled over his statement. Yes, I believe the Stonekid might have some, she acceded at last. They find all kinds of crystals in their mines, so if it is anywhere on our world, it would be with them. Dravik grinned broadly. That's fantastic. They're exceptionally rare back home, so we only have a single spare. If we can find more, that would be a huge boon for us. Thank you, Your Highness. With a respectful salute, he took his leave for her to continue her research. Tessindra chuckled and put the pad down to eat. Tarn had brought her a meal featuring food from Soledad ages ago. It had gone cold, but the combination of noodles with a rich, creamy sauce was still delicious. She studied the people instead of the pad, and saw Lauren talking to Tarn at the counter, and Lily with Bastian at a table, sharing a meal. Taz marveled that these people were so much like her own, despite their advanced technology. Her thoughts were interrupted by seeing Lark entering the hall. She waved him over, and he took a seat across from her. A lot to take in, isn't it? Lark observed as he stole a noodle from the edge of her plate. It really is, but we haven't had a new culture to interact with since the Ravagers came to us ages ago. It's nice being able to flex my diplomatic skills, Tessindra replied, pulling her food closer to guard it from him. Lark tossed her an amused look and playfully folded his arms. The engineers should be done with the upgrades by the end of the day. I am to politely remind you that Akron and the others are eager for that briefing about the Conclave's troops you promised. Tessindra nodded. We can do that tomorrow. I just like talking about it, but I guess it can't be avoided. With a vexed expression, she added, I'm surprised you didn't tell them all this since you spent so much time with them. Lark held up his hands and shook his head. I just kill the damn things. I leave the explanations to elegant speakers such as yourself. The princess giggled at that, finding herself unable to be angry at him for more than a moment. Besides, Lark continued, they've only been in Sosaria for a few days, but I think they're eager to get on with exploring the continent. I thought as much. Father wants to send an Archblade with them in case Darkos tries anything else. Tessindra stated with a knowing smile. Lark avoided her eyes, and chose to study the contents of her lunch instead. A hot spike of uncertainty went through his chest as his thoughts returned to Angel and the quagmire of emotions the Forerunner crew already provoked in him. The princess regarded him with a concerned look, but then shrugged casually. We could always figure that out later. I'm certain Saren will have some ideas of who could go. He let out a breath of relief and nimbly grabbed another piece of her food. Get your own, she snapped playfully, swatting at his hands. He laughed, unaffected by her ire, and left the mess hall. The tension of the exchange lingered behind, and Tessindra watched him go, wondering what had happened to the usually confident young fighter. These aren't beautiful. What are they for? Angel asked, studying the numerous shelves full of different colored crystals. Each was cut into a perfect cube and polished into a mirror shine, adding color and variety to the otherwise monotone records room. Information storage. They aren't nearly as sophisticated as your datapads, but they can hold a great deal of visual and audio information, Tessindra answered. How are they used? Do you use magic with them or something? Lauren picked up one the size of her thumb, with a deep indigo color, and carefully examined it. Tessindra smirked and shook her head. No, we use projectors to read the information on the crystals. Then they translate it to images you can see and hear. She waved to several small consoles with softly glowing discs pointing upwards with chairs attached to them. And that is what you will use to tell us about the Conclave's monsters, Akron finished. The princess gathered a small group of crystals into a cushioned tray. The others sat silently and waited as she inserted an orange one into the largest console in the center of the room. The air above the meter-long disc shimmered before clearing to show a projection similar to the creatures they encountered in the forest. It staggered and shambled in place, and the Forerunner crew walked around the console, taking in every angle of the monstrosity. The walking corpses, Akron growled. Desindra nodded, withered. They are reanimated bodies of the dead, and the Conclave uses them for the bulk of their numbers. Necromancers can use entropy magic to raise bodies that are years or even decades dead. They don't think or feel pain, and destroying what's left of the brain or obliterating their bone structure is the only way to destroy them. Don't they run out of bodies? There are only so many people they could raise, right? Lauren asked. Yes, but the problem is they can take pieces and stitch them together to form new creatures. If they are desperate, they can use organic material from animals and even plants to fill in what they need, so they never run out of spare parts, Desindra snarled. She removed the crystal and inserted a green one this time, showing an image of an even more terrifying creature. Its black, membranous wings stretched 4 meters wide, and the rest of its bone-thin body was covered in taut red skin. Wicked yellow talons tipped its feet and hands, grasping invisible targets. The lower jaw jutted forward in its eyeless face to accommodate its long, double canines. Blood hunters, Desindra estimated, aerial assault troops that can sense a person's heartbeat from a great distance away. They are used for surgical strikes and infiltrations. The crew remained silent, but the feeling of fear and disgust was palpable. Desindra switched to a blue crystal, bringing up an image of a huge, hulking monstrosity. It was so large that it had to bend forward to walk on its knuckles and feet. Its entire body had skin stretched so tight that even as a projection, they could see the banding colors of muscles, which were massive compared to the other creatures. Rot giants, Desindra twisted a lock of hair between her 2 fingers. Probably their most dangerous creations. They are used as siege units. They are relentless, destructive, and almost unstoppable. Conventional weapons do almost nothing, so they must be taken out with a considerable amount of force or magic. I've seen how they can level a platoon in one sweeping attack. Thankfully, the Conclave doesn't seem to have many of them compared to withered or blood hunters. But if you see one, know they are extremely dangerous and you should run. How can they make such horrific monsters? Angel asked in a small, tremulous voice. They have had centuries to experiment. Pair that with their lack of morality and disdain for the suffering of others. They have been able to perfect their creations. The princess seethed, her mind full of memories of seeing the monsters firsthand. What about the necromancers themselves? Akron's eyes were still fixed on the image of the giant as it uprooted a tree and crushed a strider in one motion. They don't usually come out to fight in person, preferring to command from the shadows or send out their creations from Lifesever. However, on the rare chance they reveal themselves, they can cause a perfectly healthy body to warp and rot where they stand, create lifeless shells from almost any dead material around them, and drive a person to madness with a simple command. So if you see one, don't engage it, and either escape or let someone with essence magic fight them. Desindra's voice was firm, ensuring the gathered audience understood her clearly. Anything else we should know? Lauren inquired as Desindra removed the last crystal, and the projection snuffed out. We have had reports here and there about other creatures, but they usually end up being failed experiments or singular encounters that can't be replicated. We have heard rumors about necromancers going through some kind of metamorphosis, but we haven't been able to confirm anything just yet, Desindra informed them, putting the crystals away. It's all third-hand reports. Sounds like we got lucky with Adora then, Angel remarked. That reminds me, I wanted your account of the encounter you had with Endura. Lark gave us a detailed report, but your perspective could be important. Almost no one survives running into him. Desindra turned to Akron with intense curiosity in her eyes. He described the entire ordeal from their first arrival on the planet to Adora's retreat, with Lauren and Angel adding some details of their own. The princess listened intently and waited until they were finished entirely before letting out a deep sigh. It's a shame he got away. If you had killed him, you could have claimed the huge bounty we have on his head, he said bitterly. But despite Darkos being in charge, Adora has led more attacks and single-handedly caused more death and suffering than anyone else in the Conclave by far. Lark nearly did. If he wasn't so busy trying to help us, he could have finished him off right there, Lauren commented. That surprises me as well. I thought Lark would leap at the opportunity to kill Adura, Cassandra lamented with a shake of her head. Why is that? Angel queried. Because he was responsible for Darian and Lyssa's deaths, Cassandra answered fiercely. The silence was suffocating, and no one spoke for a long time before Akron was suddenly struck with a question he had been dying to ask. Taz, why is Lark treated so differently here? What do you mean? The princess's eyes locked onto his with a conflicted expression of surprise and suspicion. He gets sent on long missions, spends weeks away from home at a time, and I have observed people here actively isolating him. Akron's eyes never wavered, as he was determined not to look back down from the topic. Last night, the servants kept ignoring him, and when I talked to Saren about it, he danced around the subject too, Angel confirmed. I know he's not the most charming man, but it seems excessive. He should also be commanding the Archblades, Lauren added. Akron and Angel turned to her in surprise. Lauren stared at the ceiling as though exhausted at the thoughts in her head. When Reynard returned from the library, he talked my ear off for hours. We were on duty at the time, so I was kind of trapped. Anyway, he pointed out that, for as long as they have existed, leadership of the Archblades has always passed from parent to child if possible. She raised her eyebrow as she regarded the princess. Lark has been the only exception. The princess's shoulders slumped in resignation. Lark should lead the Archblades. He has the talent and experience and would have had his father's blessing, but it wasn't allowed because of his birth. The crew merely stared at her blankly, and she made a critical decision. Here, I'll explain. She moved to the back of the records room and searched through several brilliant crystals. When she emerged, she carried one the color of obsidian reverently in her palm. Darkos is Lark's biological father, Cassandra began. The Conclave captured Lyssa during an offensive that we're still not sure wasn't just a ruse to get her onto the battlefield. Weeks later, she somehow escaped, and when she returned, she reported that Darkos had impregnated her. However, despite what she went through, she wanted to keep the child. Angel stood thunderstruck, and glancing at the others, they wore a similar expression. Her mind raced as she tried to reconcile this secret with everything she thought she knew about Lark up till now. Suddenly, many things made much more sense. Akron was silent for a long moment, as he also processed the revelation before carefully speaking. I'm shocked that the child of your greatest enemy was allowed to live. I know, but she made it clear that despite the Conclave violating her, she would make her own decisions for herself and her baby. Darian himself even stood beside her and threatened anyone that would try to take that choice away from her. Cassandra smiled as she recounted the story. As Lark grew up, it became harder to protect him, and after his parents died, no one tried to pretend to be considerate anymore. So, because he is Darkos' son, he can't lead the Archblades? Lauren inquired. That's right. He wasn't forbidden to join, especially with his unique abilities, but any leadership was forbidden, and he couldn't inherit his stepfather's name. It was a political decision, as are many of the decisions made of late, Cassandra added darkly. So, what is on the crystal? Angel asked with apprehension. A record of Lark, when he first faced his father. It might help you understand the situation more, the princess responded. Akron agreed, and the three sat before the projector while Taz put the crystal in place before turning to leave the room, as she had seen this story played out too many times already. Wisps of light appeared as tendrils of smoke began before joining together and forming a complete image. That brings us to the end of Chapter 8. So we've had a bit of a revelation as to why Lark is so, I won't say reviled, but left aside. He's definitely treated as an outsider, which is certainly not his own fault or doing, as far as we understand. There's only so much you can do about your origins, right? But it sounds like his parents, or his mother and stepfather, were genuinely good people and stood up for him and their own choices. So while they were there, I'm sure he had a good home and a good upbringing and good surroundings. But in their absence, as is often the case, the better wishes and the hoping for the more better angels of those among us to hold true and come to light doesn't always play out the way we would hope. And pragmatism, it tends to be the call word of the day. So that explains a lot for how he's being treated. Um, this next exchange in the recording, I'm sure, will give us a little bit more insight. Um, but we're definitely seeing a lot more about the world and Sosaria in general right now with the different races to kind of get the backgrounds of the different people that are populating this continent and the world, and their own conflicts themselves. Yeah, it is nice that it's out in the open. Like we're only a quarter of the way book in, a quarter of the way through the book, and we see it. So it's not like it's pushing the trope down our throats. It's giving it to us out in the open and letting us see how it develops. So yeah, we're not getting the big reveal where we've come to grow attached to a character and have the revelation all at once alongside them. So this is sort of a refreshing take. So it's yes, it's a common theme and a common trope, but that's not automatically discounted as like bad or blasé. It's just it's a refreshing take on it. All right, so let's take a few minutes now. We've gotten through a couple chapters and had a little bit of discussion between the chapters. I could use a little bit more of a drink for now. So let's go ahead and take a few minutes. We'll step aside and we'll return in just a little while with chapter 9. All right, I'll see you guys in just a little bit. Thanks. Alright, we are back. I found that the Roomba had destroyed one of the cat toys, so I had to go get that reassembled, and otherwise it'd be all hell while they're getting at me to have something for them to play with. So, we'll see how well the super glue holds. Alright, so let's go ahead and get back to it. We are up to Chapter 9. There's been quite a lot already so far. It's been a lot of exposition and backstory so far, with some light revelations of how things are here. So we'll see how things continue to develop. We'll probably, I imagine, as soon as they leave the city, things will spark back into action and activity. But there may be even something that happens before they leave. There's so much room for this to develop and directions that this could go that I can't see it being pigeonholed just yet into any specific path or trajectory for the story. So let's find out together. So let's resume now with Chapter 9. The line between righteous fury and ranting madness is only drawn by victory. Why does this have to be recorded? A younger Lark complained. It's mandatory for all communications with hostile forces, a man replied. He had mahogany hair, a manicured beard, and wore the armor of the leader of the Archblades, marking him as Darien, Lark's stepfather. Darien knelt and gently placed his hands on Lark's shoulders, meeting crimson eyes with amber ones. You don't have to do this, you know. I know, but I want to. I need to see him and hear what he wants. If I don't, I'll feel like I'm always running away, Lark insisted, with a raised chin. Darian hugged him fiercely. Even at 13, you are far braver than some grown men I have fought with, he praised. Lark returned the hug with his own strong grip. Thanks, Dad. I know that this is a lot to take in, but the most important thing is that you remember how your mother and I love you, no matter what. We have been proud of you since the day you were born, and Darkos being your father has nothing to do with the person you are or will become, Darian reassured with a proud smile. Lark nodded, and the edges of his eyes were tinged red. Darian gave one last hug to bolster his son for what was to come, before turning away and leaving Lark with the large monitor that hung on the wall. Moments later, a live feed of an older man appeared. His frighteningly pale face was filled with intense curiosity, as his head was deathly still. His hair was black as night, and his piercing red eyes burned holes into the sun that bore a strong resemblance to him. The black conclave robe was outshone by a medallion with a massive ruby, and affixed to his shoulders was a cloak that almost shrouded his appearance. "Hello, son," the man greeted silkily. Lark swallowed hard, his voice nearly failing him as he whispered, "Darkos." Darkos' lip curved into a chilling smile. "I would prefer you call me father, but we can always get to that later. I understand you have been told about your true heritage." Lark clenched his fists out of sight of the monitor, and he answered with a curt nod. "Excellent. That saves us a lot of time, so I will get straight to the point. I am sending a vessel to collect you. Afterwards we can—" "No!" Lark snapped loudly in a voice that startled himself. Darkos' face was calm and betrayed no hint of emotion, but his voice sent chills down the spine. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no! I won't go anywhere! I'm staying here with my mom and dad." Lark's voice trembled from anger rather than fear. "I am your father, boy. You belong to me and the Conclave." Darkos sneered as displeasure slowly bubbled in his voice. "You don't understand the importance of your existence. The very nature of our entropic magic renders us sterile. Yet I was able to give you life. You are a miracle of magic, the combination of my power with your mother's." He was unable to finish as Lark once again erupted, "I don't care!" He screamed and struck the monitor, causing the image to distort for a moment. "My parents loved me and told me I could do anything I want with my life. Darian raised me despite knowing what I am. I can't even understand how I could have done that." He stared at the door his stepfather had used, bloody tears running hot trails down his cheeks. "That kind of love. That's more important than power. That's pathetic weakness," Darkos roared. "You speak of their love, but what of the other people around you? The circumstances in which I made you are well known to some in Sosaria. I have no doubt you have spent years being victim to cruel stares and judgmental whispers." "Yes," Lark muttered and looked to his feet. "Then you understand. They hate you. And as you get older, that hatred will only grow. In the end, they aren't any better than we are." Lark raised his chin in defiance and gripped both sides of the monitor. A glow bloomed behind his eyes, and they shone red from rage and raw magic. "Of course they hate me! You and the Conclave are waging war, killing their people and raising their loved ones to fight in your twisted army. That's why they are so full of hate. What's your excuse?" Drops of blood fell from his eyes onto the floor as Lark stared into the screen, waiting for the answer. Darkos had returned to a visage of calm. His voice was even once more, but his intense gaze fixed on his son. "I will give you one more chance to join me, Lark. Together, we can lead the Conclave to end this senseless conflict." Lark struck the monitor again, causing a large crack to split right between Darkos' eyes. "And I will give you a warning. Be ready for me. From now on, I am going to train with my real father, and even join the Archblade so I can fight you. I won't stop until the Conclave is destroyed, and you're just a bad memory." "No!" Darkos condemned. His features etched with fury, and a red glow mirrored Lark's own sparked behind his eyes. "Death will come for you along with these pitiful cattle. You will be called Defiler, a failure and a traitor to our people, and you will suffer more than any of them. You can't stop us." "Watch me," Lark hissed and sent his fist through the monitor to end the transmission once and for all. When the recording ended, Ockran leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful hum as he processed what he had just seen. He turned to the others and saw Lauren grinning, while Angel stared at the console with an unreadable expression. That was amazing, Lauren marveled and clapped her hands. He was just a child, and he stared down this world's greatest enemy and even threatened him. I knew I liked him when I first met him. Before Arthur could respond, he was interrupted by a female guard coming into the room. Her face was calm, but her eyes were a conflux of emotions. The Conclave is sending an army to attack the Stone Talons, she exclaimed before taking a deep breath. She stood straight, attempting to regain her composure as she continued. His Majesty requests your presence in the main hall immediately while we plan what we need to do next. Akron thanked her, and the guard quickly left. The Stone Talons? The Conclave are launching an offensive against the Stonekin? Lauren asked. Sounds about right. And if they're sending an entire army, they're probably trying to wipe them out. I think our presence here is ramping up the conflict. Akron stood and rubbed his beard as the dire seriousness of what was going on sank in. Lauren, I want you to get back to the Forerunner and make sure everyone is on board and ready to go. I have a feeling we're going to be leaving very soon. Lauren saluted, turned on her heel, and bolted from the room. Angel, you come with me, and we'll see what the Sosarians have to say. Angel? He turned his head to see that she was still staring at where the projection had played a minute before. She bit her lip and felt a bolt of shame. After seeing how Lark took on his father, as she felt as though she understood him a bit better and regretted yelling at him. Her breath caught in her throat as she resolved to make it up to him somehow. Angel! Akron's voice was now right next to her as he clapped a hand on her shoulder. She snapped from her misery. Sir, sorry, yes, I'm ready to go. The two of them sprinted to the hall, passing guards and servants, talking animatedly amongst themselves about the news. The massive oak doors to the great hall were wide open, and the room was already packed with more people streaming in. The space was large enough to fit the Forerunner with plenty of room to spare. Balconies on three sides were already filled with attendants, leaning down to watch the proceedings with great interest, and some pointed to the empty golden throne at the far end of the room. Angel and Akron entered and stood at the edge of the crowd, and Angel had to stand on her toes to see above the shoulders of those in front of her. She caught sight of Lark, who stood in the center of the room on a verdant rug that bore the crest of the monarchy. He was speaking to a palace guard, who was the same one that gave the crew the report. The reports are confirmed! The loud voice of Varius boomed above the chattering crowd as he walked towards the room from a doorway that led to the palace's depths. He sat with his head high and regarded the entire room in attendance. The Conclave has sent an army towards the Stone Talons, and aid has been requested. We will send troops and resources at once. Lark flashed a determined smile and nodded in agreement with his monarch. If I may address the hall, Your Highness, a grating voice called out over the din of the masses. Angel recognized the overdressed advisor as Vaman, as he scuttled from the crowd, wearing a purple robe with silver embroidery and matching silver glasses. As he straightened the neck of his robe, Angel recalled this was the same man who had tried to commandeer their ship and turn the crew into guests. Prisoners, she thought to herself. He can call it what he wants, but he wanted to make us prisoners. As you well know, military support is clearly dictated through our treaties, and furthermore, cannot be put into action without the full agreement of the Council. Vaman smirked as he strode to the center of the room to stand next to Lark, an air of superiority and authority growing with each word. Varius sank back into his throne with an almost pained groan. He closed his eyes and steepled his hands, pressing the tips against his chin. His lack of a response was all the agreement he could bring himself to make. Vaman called out to every person in the hall. Our treaty with the Stone Skin has long since expired. We shall continue to trade with them and maintain diplomatic relations, but we cannot risk our soldiers' lives for those who we cannot be assured would do the same. A few nodded at the declaration. Some looked bewildered, and others just shook their heads in either anger or sadness. The helpless tension in the air was palpable, with the embodiment of it all sitting on the throne as Varius visibly slumped. Angel stared in shock at what was unfolding before her. She whispered covertly to Akron, How can this happen? Why would they need a treaty or anything to come to their aid? Isn't the Conclave a threat to all of them? Akron replied solemnly, Yes, but sometimes people in power are too far away from the fighting and the death to see beyond themselves. We had similar problems before Soledad was unified. He gestured to Lark, who stood stock still as though not believing his eyes or ears. But I have a feeling our friend isn't going to let this go. Angel kept her eyes trained on Lark and quietly replied, I think you're right, and it doesn't help that they really hate each other. Lark grit his teeth in rage and glared daggers into the smug advisor. They are our allies against the Conclave. We have fought as comrades countless times, and we can't just abandon them when they need us most. Vamid pointed a bony finger at Lark. Protecting our city and our people is the highest priority. Sosaria must always come first if we are to endure. The only way we will survive is if we stand together. I don't care what a piece of paper says. If anyone is under threat from the Conclave, we come to their aid, Lark insisted. If you won't help them, then I will, he announced as he attempted to end the conversation and turned to walk away. I see now how your tainted blood has caused you to break your oath and turn against our people. Vamid's voice rose above the murmuring crowd, and several people began to whisper about the Defiler betraying Sosaria. Lark flinched as though struck and froze in his tracks. Instantly, his hand came down and gripped the hilt of his sword until his knuckles were white. Finally, he called out in an even louder voice, I'll show you blood! He whipped around, and as he spun, the ring of his sword sliding from its sheath sang through the hall like an alarm bell. A low hiss escaped his lips, and he purposely sliced his hand in the same motion. By the time he came to a halt, every guard had their own weapon drawn. Do you know what this means, you pathetic coward? Lark's voice thundered as he pointed his open wound toward the shocked advisor. Vamid did not respond, but simply glared back. It means I will not stand idly by while the Conclave puts lives at risk. Not just Sosarian lives, not only bureaucratically protected lives, innocent lives. Period. Lark turned his palm so that it faced upward, and soon blood pooled in his hand to flow down his wrist. In the silence of the room, Angel could swear that she heard the first drops hit the floor. While blood flows through my veins, no innocent shall ever suffer pain. His voice reverberated from the walls as he clenched his fist. Blood dripped between his fingers as he swept his arm to the side, leaving a crescent spray on the floor in his wake. This is the oath I took as an Archblade. This is the oath my real father died for, and that is the oath I am going to uphold. You can debate forever about the politics of our allies, while I go and try to save them. Without waiting for a response, he sheathed his weapon and left the hall. He breezed by Akron and Angel, not even looking in their direction. Without a word, Akron broke into a jog to catch up with Lark. Angel snapped out of her daze and followed them. She struggled to keep up with the taller men, but at least managed to not fall too far behind. I don't know what you think you are doing, Captain, but I'm sure my people won't approve of it, Lark growled. His eyes were fixed on the path in front of them. We also have a policy about assisting people in need, regardless of who they are. It's not as drastic as what you just did, but it means we will help if we can, Akron retorted. We can probably get you there faster as well. Lark rounded on him and stared hard as though trying to get a read on the older man. Finally, he met Akron's expression with a bitter smile, and all previous doubts about accompanying them were immediately tossed aside. We can't waste any time then. The sooner we get there, the sooner we can help the Stonekin. The trio broke into a run as they wound their way through the palace's halls to get back to the ship. Angel fell behind once more and didn't realize that Lark had suddenly stopped in front of her until she ran face first into his back. She briefly saw stars and clutched her sore nose as she peeked around Lark to see what was going on. 4 soldiers, led by Saren, blocked their exit to the ship. Their postures were rigid and their faces grim. Saren stepped forward. Archblade Lark, I have been ordered to inform you that if you leave our borders without permission, your status and rank as an Archblade will be revoked. His voice was calm and did not betray a hint of emotion. Akron opened his hands in a placating gesture. We're just taking him and his strider with us on a trip to visit the other places of your lovely world. Surely you wouldn't punish him for that. Saren shook his head. Our orders are clear, sir. As you well know, you have the freedom to come and go as you please. But regarding him, we must be firm. His face softened, and his gaze lowered to Lark's. Please reconsider this. Your parents wouldn't have wanted you to be an outcast. Lark snickered humorlessly. I'm already an outcast as it is, so don't pretend otherwise. Saren and the other Archblades balked at Lark's words. But the young man continued. My father was an ally of the Stonekin, and a friend of Beldaz himself. My parents would have been much more furious than I am about leaving them to die. Make no mistake, if they were still alive, there would have been a lot more blood in that hall. He forcefully shoved past them, and they wordlessly watched him head for the ship with Angel and Akron in tow. Once aboard, Angel hurried to the drive room, and Lark followed behind Akron towards the bridge. How soon can we be there? Lark inquired. Based on the maps I saw, we can be there within a couple of days. I wish it could be sooner, but being limited to thruster power, our hands are tied. Hopefully, we can get there in time to make a difference. The bridge door opened, and Akron took his usual place. Lauren startled, and her eyes bounced between the two men in confusion. We're leaving, Akron barked loudly into the comm system as he punched in a series of numbers into the ship's computer. Follow the coordinates towards the mountains to the west and run the engine hot. Lauren began the launching sequence, and within seconds, Renard was on the bridge, taking his place at his station and scanning the immediate area. Each other crew member called over comms and to acknowledge the captain. Lark was yet again amazed at how swiftly the crew responded and focused on their jobs. Is there anything you need from me, Captain? He asked, a little unsure of what to do. Akron sat in the large center chair, going over the data, scrolling across his console. Make sure you get plenty of rest, and try to think of anything you haven't told us about what we might be in for. Other than that, maybe the drive room could use a hand. Dravik tends to grouse when I run the engine hard. His hands went expertly over the screen in front of him, and it reacted to his touch with a series of beeps and blinking lights. Lark left the bridge and slowly walked through the ship. He stopped partway towards the other sections and leaned against the wall. With a sigh, he slid down and sat on the soft, carpeted floor with his forehead resting against his fist. How's your hand? Angel's voice startled him. He turned his face upward and gave her a tired smile before flexing his fingers. The wound was nearly gone thanks to his fast healing, but a small bit of blood still pooled at the center where the blade had cut deepest. I thought you were still angry at me, he questioned with an arched brow. I was, but then I saw how you were with your own people, and I realized it wasn't personal. You seem to make a lot of people angry, she responded almost playfully, and leaned against the wall beside him. One of my more charming qualities, or so I'm told. This was different, though. I can't believe that they chose to ignore the stone skin being attacked. We've been allies for decades, and I felt as though we started making progress on a real alliance against the Conclave. His voice trailed off, and then he suddenly looked up to her. Why aren't you in the drive room? I figured engine burning hot meant all hands would have to be there helping. Angel chuckled and shook her head. I thought so as well, but they have things well in hand until my next shift. Getting the ship to go faster is honestly a matter of pushing a couple buttons and keeping an eye on the Nova Drive systems. Then why come here? Lark's voice was filled with curiosity. I wanted to apologize, she admitted, her gaze turning to the floor. You were right. I have spent my life hiding. I have a distinct comfort zone, and I never wanted to break out of it. But I've come to realize that I can do better for myself and the entire crew. Lark blinked in surprise, but said nothing as he waited for her to continue. Angel felt her face go warm as she blurted out. I wanted to talk more about the idea about your magic being compatible with my energy theories. I believe that it could be a huge scientific discovery, and I wanted to ask, would you still be interested in helping me investigate it? She studied him with hope-filled eyes and bit her lower lip nervously. Lark was struck by a softness in her features that he hadn't noticed before. He stood, and they began walking towards the mess hall, talking back and forth about their ideas. I'm dead. That's the only explanation. I'm died, and I'm finally at peace. Lark's eyes rolled back into his head as he took another enormous bite of his food. How have you never eaten anything like pizza before? Angel asked incredulously. Your people have bread, cheese, sauces. I even ate something close to pasta when we were there. Lark's only response was a soft moan as he continued to enjoy his meal. Angel ducked her head and looked around the mess hall to see if they were alone. Feeling a bit embarrassed to sit next to him as he vocalized his delight. Content they were alone, she studied the datapad once more, idly eating her own slice. So, when you channel magical energy, you think it is similar to a band of frequencies. So, when our technology is combined with, say, essence magic, it would operate similarly to a reverse prism by concentrating the frequencies on a single point, which means it could be a possible inverse of my theories about our prism-based energy technology, she theorized. Lark nodded and reached for another slice of pizza. Sounds about right. You say that your Nova Drive uses a huge prism to refract energy, over and over again until it hits a critical mass that is used to power the ship and allows you to go faster than light. I think that same prism might be usable to test your theory and be attuned with my magic. But to what end? She asked and set her crust down. Lark snatched it up and ate it in 2 bites. It's hard to imagine the idea of using magical frequencies with our technology. Lark shook his head and pointed to her datapad. It doesn't matter. Fire, water, earth, air, these are natural forces that exist with or without magic. Don't think of it as harnessing magic itself. We would be enhancing your technology through the forces of nature. It's just a matter of lining everything up right. Angel jotted down notes on her pad, setting up ideas and experiments to be done later. So let's get this started tomorrow. If your captain is okay with it, we'll meet up in the drive room to start your experiments, he continued. He glanced up from her pad with a look of panic in her eyes. No, I'm not ready. I need to triple check this and then go over it more just to make sure. It will take at least a week. A week? He asked in disbelief. The Conclave is acting right now, and if anything comes from these theories, you'll need it now. They aren't going to wait. I'm sorry, Lark, but I don't want to do this unless I'm completely certain it will work out, with no flaws or problems. She looked back down to her pad, hoping the topic would be dropped. After finishing his food, Lark sat back and let out a large sigh of frustration, staring up at the ceiling. A few moments passed, with the only sound being Angel tapping rapidly on her pad. With a huff, Lark stood up. I think we should call it a night. You can if you want. I want to go over this more. You've given me so much to think about, Angel said with a dismissive wave, not taking her eyes off her notes. Yes, but I bet you can think about it better with a good night's rest, he chided. Angel glared at him, irritation flashing in her blue eyes. I'm not a child, Lark. I can manage my bedtime. Lark shrugged with a smirk. Fine by me. When you're too tired to do anything tomorrow, I can always find someone else to help me with this. Angel growled and stood up, her pad clattering onto the table, and her face centimeters from his. I challenge you to find anyone on this ship who would understand this half as well as I do. Lark's eyes stayed fixed on hers, and his voice dropped an octave. That's the kind of passion you need to apply to this. Stop playing it safe, and start thinking outside that comfort zone of yours. Her eyes widened, appalled, as he used her own words against her. She came around the table and prodded his chest with a finger. Just because I apologized earlier and you can get a rise out of me doesn't mean you know me. You have no idea what kind of passion I am capable of. Lark's expression softened, and his eyes seemed to gaze deep, past hers, into parts of her she thought she'd carefully hid. I'd like to find out, he said quietly, his voice just above a whisper. His head barely moved towards her until she could practically feel his warmth. His gentle words caused her to gasp quietly, and her breath caught in her throat. She could hear her heart thundering in her ears and feel it in her fingertips. Her brain shouted that she needed to stay in control and keep her emotions in check. However, everything that had happened in the past week fought back and made her question that logic. At the center of it was this man, who somehow was able to bring out that potential in her, and for once in her life she wanted more. Functioning on a primal desire and lacking consideration of consequence, she grabbed his tunic and brought him in for a searing kiss. He yelped in surprise, but was immediately silenced by the contact of their lips. After the initial shock wore off, desire took over, and he slid his arms around her and returned the kiss, pressing his body against hers. Her fingers ran through his hair, and his hands caressed her back as their kiss turned from tentative to eager. Finally, she broke away and looked into his eyes, her expression going from a hazy pleasure to sudden shock. I can't believe I did that, she whispered, bringing a hand to her mouth. Her lips still had the lingering sensation of him. If we're being completely honest, neither can I, Lark agreed with a smile. You're still holding me, though, she observed, as much to herself as to him. That's right. I want to feel you in my arms as long as possible, in case I never get this chance again, he murmured, almost as if talking too loud would shatter the reality of the moment. His hands continued stroking her back in ways that made her never want to be let go. She didn't think her heart could beat any faster than it was, but his words sent it into overdrive. Any objection in her mind was completely drowned out by how wonderful his words and touch felt. How long have you wanted this? She asked him demurely, aware more than ever how soft the material of his tunic was under her fingertips. Since you made me completely rethink how my magic works, he responded, his voice firm with certainty, as though he had rehearsed the answer many times before. Angel couldn't contain her amusement as she burst out giggling. She pressed her cheek against his chest and heard the quickened beat inside. I thought that might have bothered you. He shook his head and brought one hand up and curled a lock of blonde hair on his finger. Not at all. I was completely thrown by how insightful you were. Then, whenever we spoke, and I saw how intelligent you were, it just made me admire you all the more, he confessed. Lark, she began, her hand coming down and lacing with his. She stroked her knuckles with his thumb. and somehow that helped to ground her. I don't know what I'm doing, she admitted in a shaky voice. I thought I had my life sorted out, but then coming here, meeting you, I can't figure it all out or make sense of it. He drew her chin up so that she faced him. Her eyes were misty from the emotions he could see she was struggling with. Then stop trying so hard to figure it out, he stated plainly. What? She blinked in shock and stared at him. She took a step back, but Lark's gentle arms encircled her once more and hugged her. Stop analyzing it so much. You're a brilliant woman, Angel, but sometimes you get too stuck in your head about things. His voice had a slight edge to it, but his arms tightened as if she might run, and he would lose her for good. Angel contemplated his words. Her pride tried to cast off his observation as she had before, but the more she thought about it, the more sense it made. She couldn't bring herself to say anything. It was too hard to say right now. Now, her only response was her vulnerability, and her eyes fixed on his. What do you want? Don't think. Don't plan. Just answer. What do you want at this very moment? Lark's voice was gentle, and yet she felt it was cutting deep inside her. I want to kiss you again, she answered honestly, and ran her fingers down his arms, causing him to shiver. This time, he took the lead, leaned in to acknowledge her desire with his own, and their lips met once more. After lingering and enjoying it with more certainty, he pulled away from her and tilted his head to the table. We can just end it here if you want. I bet we have time to get started on those experiments, he said playfully as he stroked her side. I'm very much awake. No, you're not getting what you want that easily, she kissed his chin and gave a gentle poke on his chest. We can start tomorrow. For now, I just want to enjoy this. He hummed in approval and embraced her again. He wanted this to last as long as she was willing. That brings us to the end of Chapter 9, wherein things started to get spicy. So yeah, there was a lot in that chapter. Starting off with the recording of the confrontation between Lark and Darkos, which was a lot of fun to read, might I point out. The back and forth there was fun, and then the council with the counselor falling back that had eerie corollaries to modern current events that I'll try not to touch on too deeply, and you know, leading to the rushed escape and the Lark's apparent abandonment of his position and duties to do what's right, and then the tension building and the things coming to a explosive head there right at the end of the chapter. So, yeah, there was quite a lot happening. There's mixed emotions all over the place. So that was fun. That was a very entertaining chapter with things that sort of spread the whole spectrum. And yeah, I could see getting your wife's perspective on that last section was probably helpful. If you've said, as you've said, she sort of struggles with anxiety herself. So having that perspective and how living in her head and the struggles to break out of it, definitely, I'm sure you've benefited a lot from that. It's one of those things that you can only have so much from your own personal experience, that you can't always write from what you know. Fair enough. I find that I don't read a whole lot of romance, so the occasional steamy chapter in a fantasy like this is about as close as I usually get. So there was, I think the last thing we read was about as far from romance as you can get while still flirting with the idea of it when we went through Wuthering Heights. So that's sort of, we all have our own realms of comfortability, but introducing a little bit of steam to any sort of genre is always a welcome twist, right? Well then, we've got yes, the peak of romance, the hate-filled, loathing pile of steaming revenge and hatred, and like that's romance at its absolute finest, right? All right. So as you said, this next chapter is one of your favorites. Um, let's go ahead and ride this momentum through. Uh, I, I I can't fight that. We've read Oedipus Rex. That is tainted, shall we say? We've read Wuthering Heights. We've read The Sun Also Rises. There's a lot of outside the norm for relationships in the selection that we've had so far. I'm afraid what that says about me. I'd rather not think about it. Okay, good. So yeah, as I do prefer to keep the channel at least pretending to be family friendly. There are certain points where it's unavoidable. Literature by nature has all sorts of like touches on the human condition in so many ways. But as long as we're not being extremely explicit, we can handle some steam. It's fine. There we go. Yeah, so that should be fine. All right, well, let's just go ahead and carry this momentum on. We'll get through the next chapter, chapter 10, hopefully without Zian chiding me too much more. So, chapter 10. The presence of the Conclave was a constant, no matter what we did. You failed. Edura knelt in the center of the stone room, his eyes fixed on the floor and not on the ramrod-straight figure facing away from him. The dark shape stood between him and a roaring fire, eclipsing the only light in the room to keep him in shadow. Edura remained silent, knowing that defending himself would only guarantee suffering. You failed! This time, the word was almost roared as the figure turned to face him. Ebony black hair flecked with white at the temples framed a pale face. Thin lips were pulled back in disgust, and crimson eyes burned into him. Darkos, master of the Conclave, glared at his second as though he were addressing a mere slave. He took 3 steps across the room until his boot could almost touch Edura's knee. On either side of them was an initiate in identical black robes. One of them fidgeted uneasily at the confrontation, before quietly muttering, "Master, perhaps." With his gaze still locked on Edura, Darkos' hand shot out towards the initiate. From his fingers burst a jagged bolt of entropy magic. It snapped and branched like lightning towards the initiate, causing the other one to retreat a step. Edura stayed still, even as the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The magic slammed into the man's chest, followed by the sound of bones breaking and his screams punctuating the silence. He stared pleadingly at his leader, but his fate was sealed. The energy crackled and coursed through him. As it went up to his brain, his eyes rolled back, and he began to convulse violently. Bloody foam poured from his mouth and nose, and with a flick of a wrist, Darkos' magic constricted his heart, and it ruptured. Thus was the end of another loyal member of the Conclave, as the body crashed to the ground. Darkos lowered his hand, and as he spoke, his anger rose with each word. For all your blustering arrogance, all your self-proclaimed gifts, you still, somehow, lost the ship. Now, Sosaria has reinforced its defenses, and it is now likely immune to our magic. After another torturously long minute of silence, he uttered the single command, "Speak." Edura carefully rose to his full height, a full head taller than Darkos, and only once he stood did he look his leader in the eyes. He took a steadying breath to keep his own emotions in check, and obeyed. The Defiler came to their rescue. If it were any other Archblade or pathetic creature from the other provinces, I would have slaughtered them without effort. Excuses? From you? Darkos mocked, his deceptively calm voice devoid of humor. You designed your son to be powerful enough to succeed you. Edura cocked his head slightly, fighting the urge to smile. Surely, you can't be surprised that your efforts bore such potent fruit. A sudden flash of tension in Darkos' shoulder, paired with a clenched jaw, signaled impending danger. The remaining initiate flinched in anticipation, but fought the urge to run. However, it was over as quickly as it began, and the air was as placid as it had been before. Edura spent his existence walking the line between being undeniably essential and fatally impertinent. However, despite the countless times Darkos had considered killing his second, Edura's unique ruthlessness was a powerful resource he needed, so he stayed his hand each time. Returning to the fire, he grabbed a sharp poker from the hearth. The flames danced across the disintegrated bones of some failed experiment. He rammed the point through what had once been a spine, and the entire thing collapsed to ashes. Adora watched intently as Darkos went to his desk. It was massive, made of dark wood like glossy obsidian and silver inlay. Mounds of papers littered the surface, along with writing implements and various measuring devices. Above the high-backed leather chair hung the large half-sword that was his personal weapon. It had been split down the center, and was made of an unknown black crystalline substance that seemed to absorb light. Almost reverently, he picked up the blade and hung it on the back of his robe. Even incomplete, it was formidable. If it could ever be reformed with its mate, it would be devastating. Darkos strode past Adora, nearly ignoring his subordinate, as the order to follow was unspoken. A large pair of armored wizards opened the double doors for him. Involuntary breaths that reeked of death hissed from their mouths as he passed. As was expected, Adora fell in step behind him, and, for a time, only the click of their boot heels on the polished floor was heard. Report. Another single word issued a simple yet unquestionable order. Adora's eyes narrowed as he heard the command. Light from torches high on the walls stretched upwards and was swallowed by the impenetrable darkness above. Reports on experiments and activities outside of Lifesaver were for initiates and the lowest-ranked members. He bared his brilliant white teeth and silently seized at the back of Darkos' head. He knew that if he were the prodigal son, he would be standing shoulder to shoulder with Darkos, and his ideas would be treated with complete respect. His eyes slipped to the gleaming walls in his reflection. Tall, blond, handsome, he did not belong with this rabble, and the thought warmed him. This was not his place, and as he glanced back at Darkos, who'd stopped before him, he couldn't help but grin. No, he thought to himself, he would rise above them all. Our agents in Sosari report the situation is developing well. The new government is proving ineffective, and the monarchy is in shambles. The citizens are scared, and there are talks about mounting a force against us on their own. An image of helpless farmers wielding pitchforks against the Conclave's creations drew a snicker from him. Darkos glared coldly at his second for his burst of immature mirth. Send a message for our agents to stand back and observe for now. They have done enough. They reached a winding stairwell and followed it down deep into the heart of Lifesaver. I still say they should assassinate the king and the princess. Without leadership, the country will crumble, Adora mused as his voice trailed off. And I could take my time with that impudent little girl. His blue eyes fluttered shut as the scene played out behind them, and he licked his lips. A pound of flesh stripped off here and there, she wouldn't be so tough anymore. In this instance, chaos and subterfuge serve our purposes better than simple brutality, Darkos reminded him, as he expertly masked any revulsion. And what of our efforts in the other kingdoms? Brought from his reverie, Adora answered, the projects are progressing as planned. No one suspects anything, and their complacency will only aid their confusion and terror when the time is right. He was unable to hide his admiration for the complexity of their plan. The landing they exited on was much different than the one above. The walls glistened with moisture, and long cracks that shed rich oil carved along every surface. Small clusters of white mushrooms sprouted along the ground, and Adora kicked a particularly bulbous one as he passed. Darkos stopped in front of a thick metal door and waited. He didn't look at Adora, but his command was implied. Open it. Adora obeyed once again and wrenched the door open so they could both pass. Although unconventional, using the levels suited for a root cellar also doubled well for other biological studies. Torches brightly lit this chamber, and the glow from metal machines littered around the space. The farthest wall was covered in large glass cylinders filled with a red nutrient fluid and pulsating mounds of flesh. Darkos approached one cylinder, causing the 4 scientists in the room to draw attention as they waited to be addressed. He merely snapped his fingers and held his palm up in expectation, not taking his eyes off the aberration inside. A novitiate was at his side at once, and handed over a stack of papers for inspection. Darkos rested his fingertips on the glass, and the mass seemed to pulse and move to his touch. As he continued to read, each mass began to slowly converge to find the spot in their cylinder to be closest to him. A slight tick formed in the corner of his mouth, and he clicked his tongue in irritation when he reached a particular page. You put in a requisition for a specific mutation of hunters, Darkos stated as he carefully read the order. Yes, after my last encounter, I have something special planned for our alien guests, Adora informed him with a feral glint in his eyes. Absently nodding, Darkos lowered his hand from the glass and returned the stack of papers to the scientist at his side. At the loss of contact, the fleshy masses dispersed and resumed their aimless floating. He brushed past Adora on his way to the back of the room, where two men were bent over a metal slab with a disfigured body on top. The arms were swollen to twice their normal size, and torn skin that still oozed blood revealed rope-like muscles and viscera. A massive swell of flesh bulged from the shoulder, forcing the head to a sharp angle, causing the broken neck that killed them. Darkos gazed at the lifeless gray eyes of what had recently been another necromancer. This one was killed mid-transformation? Adora interrogated as his lips curled from contempt. The older researcher attending the body didn't acknowledge him, and instead turned to Darkos as he bowed deeply. I am compiling a report as we speak, Master. Afterward, we will need another test subject. Excellent. Leave nothing out of your report, and I will ensure you will be properly supplied, Darkos ordered, eliciting another bow and even faster writing. Pitiful, Adora snarled. Such is a fitting end for the weak. Someday, we will be powerful enough to master our evolution without sacrificing everything in return. Darkos turned sharply and shot Adora a withering glare from which he did not shirk. If such mastery of our craft exists, it is far beyond your abilities, Adora. Without a second glance, Darkos moved on, choosing to ignore the expression on Adora's face that terrified the other scientists. Pupils fixed, eyes wide, and teeth bared in feral delight, in a fit of anger, he grasped the face of the dead necromancer and with an effortless motion popped the skull like an egg in his palm. He drew his fingers through the blood and brain matter, enjoying the duality of warm squishiness and jagged rough edges. The youngest researcher glanced at him, but only continued cataloging the findings. Feeling satisfied, Adora followed his master, not bothering to clean the gore that clung to his hand. He barely caught up to Darkos when they reached a set of much larger doors. They were impossibly tall and made of a solid metal alloy not native to the area. It would take a dozen healthy individuals to budge one side at all. Fortunately, the Conclave had other means at their disposal. A large rot giant, bound in chains and hooks, stood at the ready. It was connected to a pulley system set in the wall that guided the beast to perform its singular task. As though lifting a feather, it opened the door to an enormous chamber extending beyond vision. Inside, on wall-mounted pedestals, creatures waited to be commanded, or activated, as far as the eye could see. They housed an entire army of creations, and even now, more were being manufactured. Dozens of men and women in black robes stopped what they were doing and immediately kneeled in reverence, to form a sea of bowed heads. With a single wave of Darkos' hand, they resumed their work. The army against the Stoneskin? The Stonekin? Darkos inquired, as he began to walk along the walls, inspecting their work. On approach, as we speak. As you commanded, it should be just enough to crush their numbers, without assistance. Adora took a breath as though to say more, but chose to keep his comments to himself. This is a test, Darkos explained. We send just enough for them to need help. If our work in Sosaria is fruitful, no one will come to their aid. And if we're wrong, Adora growled, he cared little for political machinations and found them trying. Then we'll find out who we need to target next, Darkos answered simply. Failure is discovering a fault in our plan. Success is removing an obstacle. Either way, we will win something. He then paused and craned his neck up to over a rot giant chained to the wall. A slight grunt of displeasure was his only warning before taking a single step, and with a lightning-fast swing, he cleaved the creature in half with his sword. Pathetic, he hissed as he freed his weapon and wiped the blade on the edge of his cloak. Whoever created this one will be sent to the laboratory as a test subject. Our purpose cannot be burdened with mediocrity. Nearby necromancers dropped their implements and scattered to execute his order. Then I will catch up to the army, Adora proposed. I can personally make sure nothing goes wrong and report back with relevant information. No, Darkos turned to him, his eyes beginning to glow like red coals with determination. You will redouble your efforts to capture the Forerunner. They have already begun to interfere with our plans, and with the boy aiding them, we don't know what they are capable of. I may have to put an end to him accomplishing that, Adora softly pointed out. His breathing sped up in anticipation. Darkos was silent long enough to unnerve Adora before he nodded resolutely. then so be it, and use whatever resources you need. I don't want to hear any more excuses or if-onlys. Am I understood? His voice echoed across the large hall. Yes, master. Adora bowed deeply before dashing towards the entrance. He broke into a full run by the time he reached the doors, and disappeared down the corridors. The leader of the conclave shook his head in disgust at the giddiness of his second-in-command. He felt another presence behind him as soon as Adora was out of sight. He had felt her nearby for some time now, but, as usual, she waited for him to be alone. His shoulders relaxed, and he put his weapon away as he turned to face the woman. Think you will succeed this time? She asked. Her grass-green eyes were filled with concern that she still couldn't control despite her age. The hood of her robe was pulled back, and a single long braid of white hair cascaded from her otherwise shaven head. I don't honestly care at this point, Vegeta. Darkos let out a rare chuckle. Either he will remove Lark as a threat, and we will have the Forerunner's technology, or Adora will finally die for all his arrogance. Vegeta moved to stand at his side. She was mere centimeters shorter than him, with the neck of her black robe hanging loosely from her shoulders. It parted open as she moved to reveal a long, wicked blade on each hip. And you expect the Defiler to be victorious, she observed. I do, Darkos responded. Adora is powerful, relentless, and perhaps the most evil thing I have ever encountered. He will be the ultimate test of my son's abilities. You still believe the boy can be convinced to side with us? Her voice remained nonchalant, despite the hope that stirred in her chest. Decades before, as a young child, she had been separated from her parents. When it was discovered that she couldn't use magic, she was about to be killed, but Darkos himself stepped forward and saved her. Instead, he assigned her a special task. She was to be the mother, guardian, and friend of Darkos' child after he was born. She was so excited when the experiment was a success, then devastated when the biological mother escaped. Even now, she saw Lark as a surrogate child and was eager to bond with him as she was made to do. His caretakers are dead, and his people have forsaken him, Darkos answered, interrupting her thoughts. If things go to plan, the Forerunner will be without a crew. Lark will be broken from his failure, and both will be ripe for the taking. His gaze turned back to the lines of followers and their work. Then, he can finally realize his full potential under my guidance. Vegeta gave a parting bow and returned to her duties. A sudden scream and litany of begging indicated the new test subject had been found and was being forcibly led away for their turn at evolution. Wasting no more time, Darkos continued along the wall to finish his inspection. That brings us to the end of Chapter 10, wherein we got it's as is tradition, you must have a chapter from the bad guy's point of view. That's the law, right? So we got to see Darkos and his interactions and the dynamic at play with his higher ups, with his head assistants, so to say, and Adora is the ambitious second in command that is definitely plotting something and is definitely probably going to fail miserably, because that's just how these things have to play out, right? But we get plenty of traditional dynamics going on. The evil organization always has things going on. There's irons in the fire. And Darkos is fun to read. When we first read him in the recording with Lark, it immediately struck that it's a fun dynamic, kind of withdrawn and contemplative, but still capable of passion as needed. So it's an interesting antagonist for sure. It'll be interesting to see when he actually comes into direct confrontation with the protagonists, whether that be only Lark or the crew, or if he'll fall in ignominy before that. There's lots of ways for it to play out, but the climax that I expect is probably coming in probably about 3/4 of the way through is usually when these things happen, but we'll see. All right, guys. Well, it is 10 o'clock, and we finished right at the end of a chapter, and it feels like a good point to wrap for the evening. So we've had sort of things are happening. There's the politics, and we've seen that definitely the conclave is behind the failing politics and the council stymieing the works over at Cesaria. So there's things happening, as we thought. There's some dark motivations and people preying upon the baser indulgences and instincts that are going to cause more and more problems. They already have, as we see that the Stonekin are left friendless and alone against their invasion, unless Lark and the Forerunner can make it in time to make a difference and make the tip the balance in the scales. But will they be able to make it in time? Will Adura intercept them and make it just not work out? I imagine they'll escape from him, or maybe even put an end to him. But will that cost them too much time? Will it be enough to save the Stonekin? We won't know yet. Probably in a couple chapters, but this is probably as good a point as any to call it for the night. It's been a lot of fun so far. We've definitely seen the interpersonal relationships coming through, and yeah. So let's plan to be together tomorrow for our regularly scheduled 8 to 10 again. We're about 30, so we're about a third of the way through the book as of right now. So we've got a fair bit left. This is probably going to be probably a 6-part or so series. We'll see where it takes us. Probably over the course of the next 2 weeks or so we'll finish. Yeah, exciting to get through each of the new chapters and see how things develop. And as I've mentioned before, I have not read this before. Trying to take it, experience it all for the first time with you guys here on stream. So all the surprises that I see are every bit as surprising to me as they are to you. That sort of adds to the tension, I think. So we'll continue to enjoy this together as we see the developing of the story, the twists and turns of the story, the interactions and growth of the characters, as we see who falls, who triumphs, and how things will fall into place for the intrepid crew of the Forerunner and their guest. It's hard to say what Lark is at this point. And whether or not the Lark's home country will be able to pull itself back together. It's always an interesting subplot of whether or not society can recover from being so horribly misaligned. Well, let's go ahead and call it a night for the night. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. And I certainly hope that you will join us tomorrow. And I encourage you, if you've not yet, to give the author a follow over on Bluesky and just keep appraised of how things are going. And just, we're all in a community again, right? All right. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.